My name is Maurice Ojeda, and I hope everybody's having a good Wednesday. This is our fourth session, Terillium's web series. We are doing today safeguarding E1 from external threats. If you missed any of the previous sessions, we do have them, or we will have them online. I'm not sure how we're going to get this link out, or you can copy it here. I think Davis is going to send a PowerPoint out later, but you can click on this and you'll be able to review the previous three and the one we're going to do today. Just quick notes about Terillium. We average 16, 18 years. Myself, I have 18 years experience in Edwards. We have consultants all throughout the US, and we have clients all throughout the world. So we do all aspects of Enterprise One and a lot of third-party applications too. One of the things that we're pretty proud of last year, we did over 100,000 hours of remote consulting, which, as we all know, that's pretty important these days. If you're not familiar with Terillium, we do have a newsletter you can subscribe to, and there's also an email, weknowjde@terillium.com, and that'll keep you up to date, apprised of the new things that we're up to and any active news, like any future webinars like this that we're planning on doing. Myself, like I said earlier, my name is Maurice Ojeda. I do CNC work for Terillium. And just a quick blurb about me. Started this, came from internal IT department about in 99, 2000. They started out on the road, worked with a lot of consulting companies back B732, learned on the job really because there wasn't much formal training in those days. We got off the road, was doing on-premise support, architecture, sales cycle for a hosting company. This is back probably about 10 years ago when cloud support for E1 was just starting. And in the last 2 years, I've been very fortunate to be part of the Terillium team. And I do a lot of project work, managed service work for Terillium and our various customers. During this webinar, if you should have any questions, you have a toolbar on the right of your screen. And you can just click there, and David will keep track of the questions, and he'll stop me when it's necessary, or we'll go over the questions at the end. Or maybe at the end of each section, we'll just see how those go. Lastly, our agenda for today. There we go. So we are talking security. I don't plan on getting too technical, but I do want to give you a broad sense of what we do at Terillium for our customers, basic security that we put for everybody to give you a good foundation. Then we'll discuss a little bit about different opportunities for data security, specific data security. And then lastly, we'll talk about network security and the different flavors and how we've been implementing security for our clients. And then we'll leave a few minutes for questions at the end. So again, not too technical, but it'll be a good broad stroke of what we do. Security, here we go, basic principles. So I think for us, the first thing that's important for our customers is to get on a patching schedule. Most of our customers now, I think maybe all, are using WebLogic and are part of the Oracle stack. So it's very important. There's a link here, oracle.com security alerts. That'll get you on the mailing list for any quarterly patches or any emergency updates that may come out. I think we believe that's the first line of defense before we go any further, is to make sure your OS is patched, your WebLogic, and your E1 application. And those will come out in these security alerts. Most of the E1 security advisories will be in the form of tools releases. And so I think we'll probably be all aware of the different one-offs we have for tools releases. But they'll all be in there. The WebLogic, a lot of the Oracle applications, they offer zero-day patching. So there's opportunities to stay current for especially the critical ones without bringing your system down. So we work with a lot of our clients to make sure we're on the patching schedule. I think we're big advocates of that. Secondly, the base foundation. I think most of us pretty familiar with the JD Edwards security system. There's delivery of the system, which we call an open system, where everything is granted to all users in E1. There's no records in the security table, and you are instructed then to take away access to applications to users. That's how E1's delivered. It's the easiest way to do things, but it's also the most vulnerable to security holes, security misses. There's so many objects, as you all know, 80,000 objects at least in E1, 13,000 tables and whatnot. So there's a lot of room for missing objects, paths, menu structures. So we don't ever recommend this, but this is how it's delivered. What we recommend, and I think by this point in the life cycle of E1, I think everybody's doing it, is the closed system. So we get E1, and then we just lock everything down. And then it's an intensive process, but we go through the different modules, the different groups, and we take the users, and we as a group will walk them through the daily processes and grant back access to what they need instead of taking away. This is the most secure way to do things. It prevents accidentally running UBE that can manipulate data, or seeing data that you shouldn't see, or intentionally doing things. There's third-party applications that can help with this. I think the one we use a lot with our clients is called All-Out Security. And it's a good module that runs on top of E1. We have a lot of familiarity using that too. So we help a lot of our customers. We work with All-Out, implement the system, help the customer create a security plan using All-Out, and take that all through the process of audits and Sarbanes if they're public. Basic account principles. When we talk about security, the fundamental securities, I think we can't overlook the access of users, user access. So we operate on the least privilege, and that goes from E1 access to WebLogic console to server manager to any entry point into the system. I think it's very easy to overextend access to users. So we work with our VAs, with the accounts, to always give as little as possible. Roles, we advocate roles and groups where applicable. LDAP integration, I'm not sure how many are using LDAP, but we also are very versed with that. So I think most of the clients I've been installing and upgrading lately, we've all done LDAP. It supports long username, which we'll get into here in a second, long passwords. And as of 9234, we can use SSL with LDAP. So that works pretty well now also. LDAP, it centralizes your user and password management, but don't get it confused with single sign-on. So they still have to log into their desktop. They still have to do other integration to other applications. It just works with Enterprise One. On the topic of account control, so with the newer tools releases, one of the things we also advocate out of the gate is enabling long passwords and long usernames. But like I said, LDAP works with this also, but this gives all our customers the ability to have 40 characters, and you can set up a lot more control and refinement of what users' passwords should be like, how often they should change it, and a lot more control over the policies. And as we know, longer passwords is a more secure system. Out of the box, this isn't enabled, by the way. So we talked about patching, talked about user control. I think a lot of times it doesn't get talked about with security, but in fact, one of our customers say we just had a change control meeting today, but this is a huge thing, I believe, with when it comes to security is change management. How are you going to move objects throughout the system? Who can do it? What changes are going in? And even outside of E1, we work with our customers at large that have existing processes and that already have a change management system in place to integrate E1 into their existing system. So we want to make it seamless for our customers to bring an E1 application in, the whole infrastructure, and we all work together. But that's also the biggest thing, is to make sure what you're bringing into a production environment is secure and has been approved and audited and trackable. So we spend a lot of time on change control. So I think that went pretty quick, but that is among some of our basic fundamental security principles that we put in for our customers. Was there anything there, David, that you think we need to add?
Nope, I think you're doing well. If anybody wants any questions or has questions, feel free to enter them in your box. So far, I don't have any questions out there for you. So we can keep on moving on. And if, like I said, go ahead and put them in if you've got them, and we'll address them when we get to them.
Good deal. So the next section we're going to touch on is data security. How do we protect our data now? So with the recent tools releases, the first line of defense for data security is to encrypt our passwords. So if you're not using it, make sure we're using it. Oracle gave us the ability in Enterprise One to use site keys. And with site keys, it creates an encrypted key that we put this key on all our servers. And these servers then will be able to encrypt passwords in INI files, as long as we do it within Server Manager. And we'll look at a couple examples here. But these passwords that are in different INI files, we have our JDE, excuse me. All these passwords used to be unencrypted, but now with the site key, if a user was able to get to any of these files, they wouldn't be able to see the password. Site key is really good, really important. Database proxy user. So on the back end, for data security, we connect to databases. So out of the box, typically E1 is a one-to-many configuration, meaning it will give you a single user, back-end user, that will connect to the database, and all our E1 users will connect to that database using that one user. And that's a pretty standard configuration. It works for a lot of people. The problem with that, you have less control, you have less auditability, because everything that comes in on the database side is linked back to that single database user. So a more secure way to do things that we advocate to customers and we've been implementing is a one-on-one, where every user has a supporting back-end database user to connect to. That gives you a lot more control for audit, logging, and even database security. Sometimes that is overkill, depending on what they're doing. So we can defer to something like module security, to where if it's payroll, for example, then we can move, let's say, one example would be, we'll take all the payroll tables, put them in a separate database, make all the ancillary changes, the mappings, the OCMs, things like that to point there. But then we'll have a specific backend user that can access that database. And only the payroll group, for example, will have access to that backend user. So now you're protected. You're protected. What we did in the beginning with, we did the closed system, where we took everything away to everybody, and we granted the payroll applications. And we protected it to where if you're not in payroll or part of the payroll role, you shouldn't be able to launch an application. But let's say you were able to get in through data browser, or maybe you brought up a SQL Connect or some kind of ODBC, maybe through Excel or whatever the case. You're also protected now because the backend account is not attached to your E1 user. So this just adds another layer of security. All this information is stored in a table, and again, that takes us back to our site key encryption. So this is just as good as our encryption is good. So when you do database proxy users, the site key will encrypt, and depending on your tool's release, it will encrypt in different methods. So we just want to make sure that when we have this set up, that we're doing it from the database, from the deployment server, and we have the newest site key in place from the deployment server. We have a setting here in the INI file that as long as on-the-fly migration is true, if you were to upgrade your tools release, then it would recognize that my encrypted database user password is an old encryption, and it'll re-encrypt it on the fly. So we want to protect our database, but we also want to protect our password. The data itself. So Oracle JDENET support is certified with this one. I'm just going to focus on Oracle, but Oracle database. But a lot of the same things apply for like SQL database. But it's called TDE, Transparent Data Encryption. And what this is at the database level. This is outside of Enterprise One. And what this will do, once it's enabled, is whatever's in your database, it will encrypt on the fly and send it back out. And then when it comes back in, it reads it, encrypts it, and puts it back in the table. This is, like I said, this is recently, I can't remember when, but pretty recently this was certified with E1 to work. I don't think the last I read on the support side, the Microsoft SQL TDE is not officially certified, but it's known to work. So not sure what that would mean when it comes to support, but I know if you do on the Oracle, they will support it if you open a ticket. This is what we just talked about. So the data is encrypted at use time. The overhead, from what we've seen when we have this implemented clients, is minimal to nothing. It's all on the server side. It's on the database. Works very well. You get compression. It's seamless to the user. The only caveat I would say is that the last item there is the network consideration. It's because this is done at the database side and it's done real time. When it reads it from the database, it unencrypts it and it sends it over to E1, to the WebLogic server, for example, to display on the screen. That network traffic is not encrypted. And it's for various customers that may or may not be an issue, but just keep that in mind if you do go down the path of TDE. Right now, and then we'll get into that the next stage, but that is a hole right now with Enterprise One. So yeah, so TDE works really well. Overhead is almost nothing. Compression works, and this is for both what I've seen for SQL Server and Oracle. But again, for SQL Server and Oracle, the network consideration needs to be remembered, or at least taken into consideration that it's still exposed. So to wrap that section up, the analysis is protect your sensitive data at the source, whether it's TDE. So if somebody gets to your database, it's encrypted. It's only unencrypted once the application hits it. So if they get to the database, protect access to the database, right? We can set up the different backend users. We can encrypt the passwords of those backend users. So it's just wrapping that all into where you have the E1 component. Now we have the database component. David?
Yep, we do have a couple questions out there, Maurice. First question comes in is, can we use multi-factor authentication to log into JD Edwards?
I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that being used yet. Have you?
I'm not aware that it is natively supported in JD Edwards at this time. I would have to assume there are some third-party tools that could be used to create an MFA solution.
Yeah, I think the closest, and that's a good one. I can follow up if you know who they are. I can email them after. But I think the closest I've seen is like a Oracle OAM SSL type implementation where you use it on that end, on the front end before you hit E1. But nothing in E1 that I know of. No, would do a multi-factor.
Yep.
I can follow up with the OAM stuff.
Excellent. The other question I have is, how long can a user ID be in JD Edwards?
Oh, I know the password is 40 characters. I don't know how long. I think that limitation is going to be, well, I don't want to lie. Won't we check that email and follow back up too? Okay. Unless you know off the top of your head.
I thought initially that the user IDs could be 10 characters until you turn long username passwords on, which I think then it goes to some large number like 256 characters.
Yeah, that sounds, yeah, the 10 character was definitely the older one. And once you turn it on, I'm not sure the limit though.
I know it's long enough to fit an email address, so
yeah,
that's a good number.
It definitely, yes. I've seen emails in there, and it's really long.
All right. Like I said, if there's any more questions, feel free to enter those in the box to your right there. Those are the questions we have right now. So good to go, Maurice.
All right. This is easy. Network security is our third part. So again, what we talked about to this point, the first one is what we just do out of the gate, right? We establish that foundation for all our customers. Let's get our patching. Let's get a closed system organized. Let's get our change control going. Let's talk now. Get the user long name, long password. So those are just the basic foundation stuff. And then we get into the data security, which we just went over. And I think depending on the client needs, some are fine with the 1 to many ratio for the backend proxy users. Some only do payroll, for example, so one of few. Very few customers honestly need a 1-to-1 ratio, but it's out there. And then using the data encryption, I think is still new enough that a lot of people don't do it, but the ones that do, it works very well. And it just gives you an additional layer of security. But again, it might be overkill for some. But now the network security, I know that we've been seeing more of a push for this, and we do this for almost all of our customers. And when we talk about network security, there's a couple of different things, but mainly we're talking about encryption again for SSL. The key areas of encryption. So we can do SSL encryption between E1 and all, or when I say E1, the enterprise server, the main server for JD Edwards and all of its ancillary components through the JDENET communication. We can do SSL there. And then we can do SSL for the entry points from the user side to the WebLogic server, to BI, to AIS, and in between all these servers too, we can do SSL. And I think a lot of times now, what we see is it used to be, if your application is accessible to the public through the internet, then let's do SSL. But I think now what I'm seeing is the question more is, can I get to the internet from my desktop as a user? And if I can, then let's do SSL for everything. So if the machine that I'm using to log into E1, if I can also go to msn.com, then that machine we need to put SSL everywhere. It doesn't, the implementation process it's not difficult, and it's worth it, right? So we do it for the JDENET, we do it for all application servers, and of course we do it for Server Manager. Server Manager, as most of you are familiar, is the dashboard for E1. It gives you a single point of access to your logging, your stopping and starting of the servers, your your visibility into different metrics, who's logged in, who is, what users. And so that communication between the agents on each server and the server manager or hub itself, it's best to have that secured also, because there's a lot of traffic going between sign-in, passwords, logins, and a lot of data transactional stuff, logging and stuff. So we, right now, I think across the board, I would say at least the newer customers we're bringing on, the ones that have been, that's a different project, but the newer ones, we definitely are pushing SSL across the board for everything we can. Let me get to this next one. This just goes a little bit more in depth what I was talking about for the JDENET. When we encrypt this, that means that all the communication between E1 and the rest of the servers are encrypted, and it comes with an ability to create these certificates, and you can create them using the E1 tool set. You can create them using your Active Directory. You can create them using a recognized authority, like GoDaddy or VeriSign, whoever you want. It's just different levels of cost, different levels of administration. But at the end of the day, you just want to make sure you have the padlock on your browser, and that all the communication is encrypted. And again, the one thing that's missing from all this is the encryption between the enterprise server and the database. So we just went through this actually for a customer that wanted to do that, and we tried all kinds of things. But it came down to we had to open a ticket with Oracle because we just couldn't get it to work. And what we're talking about specifically is, so like if this customer had that TDE that we were talking about, transparent data encryption, so their SQL server, if you got to the database somehow, the data was sitting there encrypted, didn't look like anything. Now E1 makes a call on the table, so SQL server has overhead a layer above the database, for example, that decrypts it, and then it sends it from the database server to the enterprise server for it to then send to the web server or whichever direction is going. But that communication there, that's the part we're talking about. And so we know Oracle database and SQL server, they don't currently do any encryption on their side, and E1 doesn't do it either. So there are ways to do it with other applications, but right now we can't encrypt that communication. So that's the one hole we have. Of course, if your database server and enterprise server were on the same server, this wouldn't be an issue. So again, I guess it just depends on your architecture if this is exposure or not. That was a long way to say that SSL everywhere you can. It's highly recommended at this point. The one caveat is database communication. We can't do that yet. Here's just a quick look of how, if we did this JDENET encryption, which is highly recommended, is you would never see this communication as an end user, but between the servers. It's as simple as going to Server Manager, bringing up your enterprise server, punching in the correct certificate path, and enabling it. For the web servers, without getting too technical, it's very easy also. We just we create our repository, we go request a certificate, and that request could be from or to itself. So for a self-signed certificate, it could be to your Active Directory certificate server, or it could be to a authority. Then that request will return a certificate, and we'll put that into the repository, and then we load that up on the WebLogic servers. The most important thing, once you get this, is to disable all your non-HTTPS ports. And again, we are just limiting all the points of entry. A lot of times, you have other ports also available, the admin ports. You can secure that if you like, or you can just turn those off and bring them up and down as needed, rather than if they're not going to be secured, don't leave them up, right, all the time. Here's an example of how we would set up whether your network was in or out of an internal network. You could segregate your database, enterprise server, WebLogic server behind a firewall, and then you have your web server, and then you have another firewall. The first one by the end user, for example, could be your public access. They would hit this, and then before anything gets into your internal, we would have another set of firewall rules to get in. We're going to see later on, I think I have a slide later, but there's a way to also, when we're talking about firewalls, we can define the type of ports we have there. And I think that's two more slides down, but I'll come back to that. So that's in a nutshell the SSL part. Again, I highly recommend everybody does SSL, internal or not. You never know. I guess if you were internal only and nobody had access to the internet on their desktops and 100% secure, then maybe it wouldn't be as important. But I think once anybody can get to the internet from anywhere, you're exposed. Network security basics. So here's the exposure that I see a lot of customers we just kind of leave by the wayside, and that's files and folders. So there's a lot of exposure right now. We have deployment server, we have print queues and media objects. One of the things that we've done recently within the last year with the newer tools releases is we started moving all the print queue PDFs and all the media objects into the database. So they used to be accessible on your deployment server or some file server out in your network. And that's how it was done. You had a file server, everything was stored there. If you scanned an invoice, if you had a payroll check or something like that, they were all on the file server. Whether or not you could access it with your domain credentials was another topic, but they were out there. But now, so one of the things to do is take those two specifically and we put it in the database. So there's not a way for a user or anybody else, for that matter, to go out there and see it. They would have to get to the database, and we covered that earlier, right? We can encrypt the database. We can we want to segregate the proxy users for the database, but we protect the database. So now we're pretty sure that since all these objects are on the database, that the right person can see that through the application or outside the application. And on the database also, a lot of this stuff is kept in a file format that you can't really make much sense of. So I think when it comes to files and folders, that's one of our newer security basics, is to move that out, get that off the file server. And also on a side note, when it's not on the file server, you have less of a single point of failure, right? It used to be also, if this was on the file server, maybe not so much the print queue, but your media objects, if that was on a file server and it went down, then that's just another point. But now we have it in a database. There's a lot of redundancy a lot of customers are using, but it's just for all intents, redundancy, security, it's better to move those out. So if you're still using that in a file server, I would recommend pushing it up if you're on the right tools release. Other common areas for folder security, we have the deployment server that's typically shared, and you want it shared. You'll need it shared for package deployments, but not everything needs to be shared. So maybe an audit or a check of who has access to what. You have server manager agents that have log files, INI files kept in there. So a lot of these things, and if somebody wanted to be curious, they could just start putting in the machine name and see what shares are out there. So that's a good one for us to, we typically, when we run out of things to look at, I just go out there and start typing in server names, and it's interesting to see what's available. So I wouldn't overlook that. And then to wrap up our network security, optimal setup. I guess I didn't bring up VLANs, but on here I had it on. If you have an opportunity, we talked about firewalls and segregation, but if you had an opportunity to even segregate your entire E1 implementation, VLANs, we see a lot of customers doing that now. Once you start doing VLANs, then you really are going to use firewalls. So you're going to need this third item down here, predefined JDENET ports. And if you're not using it, ask your technical resource how you could use it, how it will apply. But basically, what it's saying is, I'm gonna tell E1 to use these ports in this range and nothing else outside. And what that does, that makes your internal IT staff, they love that, because now they can say, okay, I'm only going to expose that range of ports to my firewall, and I don't have to worry about, if anything outside this range comes in, I'm not letting it through. Without this, E1 potentially could grab, well, it does. It grabs ports from all different ranges and areas, whatever's available. So this just brings it all down. I don't know if anybody's using that right now, but that's pretty important for us also. I think that's it for I have from the network side of it. Anything there, David?
Nope, at this point, there are no new questions, but if a reminder, if anybody has any questions, feel free to type them in your question box.
All right. So I have just a couple more, and they're just overall going back over review of what we're saying when we want to implement security. And I think the reality check, right? We want to make sure our patching schedule is current. OS patching, there can be issues with downtime, I know, but get the OS going. A lot of the Oracle patching, a lot of it now is zero day, so we can do WebLogic patching. I know a lot of my peers, we do patching throughout the time, during low times, but we don't have to bring system down to do a lot of our WebLogic patching. Stay up to date on your tools release the best you can, at least the base levels, right? If you're on the .1, more than likely stay abreast what's happening. That's probably going to get fixed pretty quickly with everything that was discovered. And get on that mailing list. That's Oracle mailing list. That'll let you know what's going and what needs to be addressed and what may or may not be critical. Long username, I think that's one of our follow-ups, Dave. We need to find what the long username limit is, which I never paid attention, to be honest, because it was so long, it never came into play for me. I just know the passwords, interesting enough, did come into play because I did have a user that wanted a longer than 40 characters, so that's the reason why I know that one. Change management, audit control. We didn't really talk much about the capabilities of E1 and audits, but just notice there, we do it. Twilio can really help you if you want to implement that. You can specify the tables, and we'll use table triggers, and E1 is built for this. It will log everything that's done to this table in a separate table, and so that's another level of security. Change management is having a tight process through your object promotion schedule, who can do what, when they can do it, and then also outside as it relates to your overall organization, right? How does this fit into our production outage or our production approval change management? So I think all that's very important, and we work closely with all our customers to get that in place, so there are no surprises. Network security, isolate. That's the best you can do, but you can't really do that anymore because I think everybody has internet access. So if you can't do that, then isolate as much as you can through VLANs, through firewalls. We're very well versed. At this point, I think all our customers are doing this. So if you need any help with that or need any architecting, we can definitely help. There's probably very little that we haven't seen when it comes to network security. And SSL, we're the only place, again, that we're exposed is database to server. Other than that, I would strongly advocate SSL everywhere else. And the files and folders, If you're on the tools release that can utilize the print queue and media objects in the database, by all means do that. And then once you do that, for all intents, you can turn off your deployment server. And I think, anytime you have something down is better, right? If you're not using deployment server, don't keep it up. It's another exposure point. If you're not using your non-SL, bring it down. If you're not using PY, bring it down, right? And I'm not talking like for a day, but if you're not going to use it for a month, then just bring it down. That's another point that you don't have to worry about people getting into. But yeah, I think that, let me see, I think that covers up for my slides. Questions, and then here's a link to register for our series.
Awesome. Thanks, Maurice. If anybody has any more questions, feel free to type them in now. Otherwise, I want to thank everybody for attending. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Maurice or myself. This is David Toll. I'm at dtoll@trillium.com, and we will definitely get answers back to you. I'm just giving a minute to see if any more questions come in. All right, if any more questions come in afterwards, we will go ahead and answer those directly to you. But once again, thank you guys for attending, and have a good day. Thanks, Maurice.
Thank you. Thanks, David. You guys have a good one.